when we're doing the adjustment, we're not so much necessarily taking pressure. Well, you can, it's a cranial nerve. We're not taking pressure off the cranial nerve. It's not subluxated. However, we are trying to add cues of safety into our physiology so that it can detect safety. And then all of a sudden it goes, we're clear. Turn the prefrontal cortex back on.
Well, hello, everybody. Dr. Ron Oberstein, president of Life Chiropractic College West, and I'm coming at you with another one of our Life West leadership line. Today, as you can see, I've got two wonderful people. If you haven't met them yet or seen them around, you're going to be just amazed at what you're going to hear today. But not only that, if you have, you're still going to be amazed. So hold on to your seats. I have Dr. Don and Brandi MacDonald with us. So hi, guys. Welcome to the Life West Leadership Line.
Glad to be here. How you doing?
Coming at us from Alberta, Canada, north of the border. You know, it's just, or we're south of the border, any way you want to look at it, I guess. Totally cool. For our audience, I want to give you just a little bit of a brief history. First, I want to talk about Brandi, because Brandi is not a chiropractor, but should be getting some kind of a honorary chiropractic degree at some time. It could easily go through chiropractic school, but she's been involved in the profession for 20-something years, but lecturing for the last 15 years. Started off with CAs, and then now she's working with doctors, talking about communication and all kinds of things around the office and just within their lives and how they do it. I think originally, Brandi, you were a social worker, have a social work background. Right. Just incredible, to be able to find new ways of communicating. She was also on the board of the Australian Chiropractic Research Foundation. So that's a huge thing, right? And then right now in Canada, there's two national associations, and the newest association Brandi helped form. And she was with another doctor. They started this association, the Canada National Alliance of Chiropractic. And that's just huge, Brandi, for a layperson, let alone, right? It's just huge. When I say layperson, you are chiropractic. I know that, but it's just amazing. And I want to, just before I introduce Don, I just want to let you know how inspired I am by what I just read, because it is phenomenal. And then we got Don to Brandi's right. Dr. Don MacDonald graduated from Palmer College 26 years ago in 1997. Met Brandi a week after opening his practice. The first thing I asked was, were you a patient? Absolutely not. Don was getting a drink at a bar, and Brandi was serving him. And, she was a social worker and then slinging the bar stuff 3 days a week, those days when you need to have two jobs to keep yourself going. And, she got into his head and into his heart. The relationship started right there, right? Don's been involved. He's been in practice now for 26 years, but he's been involved in the Edmonton area in politics and working with the president of the association in Edmonton, Chiropractic Association, for about 9 years. They constantly involved in things. He's been teaching, and of course, both of them are teaching. They were teaching 15 years ago, but now they just recently started something, maybe about 5 years ago. I might be off my timing, something like that, but they started something called the Vitality Shift, which then changed into another seminar that they're doing called the Informed Chiropractor. And then the Informed Chiropractor is pretty much neuro-based, and they're going all over the world right now teaching neuro-based polyvagal theory and things like that. And it's just a pleasure to have you guys. That was a lot to get out, I want you to know.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
You also just forgot to mention, you were my very first coach too. My first.
There you go. There you go. I remember him when, right? When he was just pounding on tables, kind of thing. No, but it is really great to have you both. So welcome to the Life West Leadership Line, because it's thrilled. And I want to start in. And to be honest with you, really where I want to start, I hope you don't mind, I want to go right into the polyvagal thing, because I've heard it. We've got Drew Rubin coming out to the Wave, and Drew teaches for the ICPA, and he does polyvagal. I had him do something online he did an online seminar for our students during the pandemic, I believe. And it's just amazing stuff, and I'm still learning about it, right? But I just want to jump into that because I think it's so cool. Let's talk about it. First of all, how did you get into the polyvagal? And I don't know who to direct the questions to, so you guys can either tap each other on the foot or pinch each other, do whatever, or go like this, whatever you want. But
Brandi usually talks first and I talk second normally.
Yeah, it's usually how it works. I'll inspire him. Polyvagal in my life was a long time ago. I've always known about it. We use it. It's very popular in therapy, social work, psychology, psychiatry, early childhood. When COVID happened, for all of us that have been in practice, not only was it distressing for those of us going through COVID, it was distressing for our people. And so when things started rolling again and offices started opening again and people started coming back, we quickly realized that the people we cared for before, they might be looking the same, they might appear to be in the same body, but they were different people. And we knew that we had to evolve the way in which we cared for these folks, not only clinically through our technique protocols, but also the way the office cared for them, because we were really dealing with a traumatized species. And I think it was the first time really in chiropractic, unless that was a specialty of chiropractors, that we really had to start looking at what trauma was, what it is, and how it impacts the nervous system. And that's sort of where it came to be initially for the two of us in our own practice.
And for me, especially, I found the people were definitely different coming in, and I actually had to start adjusting people differently. Like I couldn't adjust them the same way that I was adjusting before. And I found myself just innately adapting my technique style. And then once the pandemic happened and Brandi had told me about the polyvagal theory and I started learning a lot more about it, it actually gave me some more words and gave me a lot better way to describe what I was seeing. Because in the past, we were always about sympathetic dominance, but now people were like shut down. So it didn't seem like it. So it was confusing at first, but this helped us explain it.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you talk like that, because when you say that, I started adjusting people differently, right? It wasn't that you went from the left side to the right side, or you went from, prone to supine. You started seeing them their nervous systems were shining in a much different light, obviously, right? And that's what I get you were saying, right? Wow, and so talk to me about that, because how, for both of you, how did you start to incorporate this? Obviously you're teaching this now, but how did you start to incorporate it? And was it just kind of like Brandi, you saying to Don, hey, these people are coming in different, I've got this information that I had through my social work and other things that you've been doing, and let's put this into the practice, into what we do, right, and make that work? Is that, or how did that happen?
I think it was probably a little more organic than that. Dawn and I, in our years and years of practice and working with chiropractors, have never really gone, okay, then we're going to start to do this. It's never, it's just never been that way. It's sort of always evolved in the sense that, like Dawn used the word innately, we just in our practice lives, when something presents itself to ourselves, because we've had such a hard time in chiropractic, today we go, okay, I'm going to listen to that. I don't necessarily know what the answer is right now, but I'm going to try to find it out. And I think I innately knew prior to us reopening our offices, I innately knew it was going to be different. I knew that people could not be isolated to the degree in which we were, and we would not end up having health problems, because that was my past world. So I just didn't ever link it to chiropractic. So I think there was a lot of innateness to that evolution that we sort of created in our office. And like Dawn said, what happened before for some people, which was perfect, now was either too much or too little. So It was always taking into account, was it too much or too little? And we just found that, it was either too much or too little, too much input, too little input, too much information, too little information. So all of our perfect procedures and scripts and like that didn't work post-COVID world. So I think a lot of it was a rollout of a lot of practice and saying, that's interesting. What happened there? And then for Dawn, I think similar thing with adjusting.
Right. So break it down for me then, because I love that, like in chiropractic, we're always adapting, right? And the body is always adapting. That's the whole thing. Adaptability is really what healing and living actually is about, right? Not just healing, but living. And obviously you guys adapted, right? You did this adaptation to what you were seeing, right? Obviously I've gotten great results, because you wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you didn't get great results. What are the principles? Like, what's the foundation when you talk about, the polyvagal? what's the foundation? Is there a foundation, I should say,
Yeah, well,
or multiple foundations?
Yeah.
Well, there's really three foundations to polyvagal, but like the major premise, if I can use similar language, the major premise of polyvagal is there's a hierarchy in the nervous system. And that hierarchy is actually evolved over our evolution from reptiles to bony fish to mammals. And so that evolution of the nervous system really has been created so that we could formulate into these species we call mammals and ultimately humans that are co-regulating with one another. We exist because of one another. We survive with one another. All of these areas that the nervous system had to eventually evolve and develop because obviously we became bipeds, upright, eye contact, and moving through time and space with one another. So the hierarchy of the nervous system is the major premise of polyvagal. And the fact that there are, like Don said, I'll let him speak to that. But in the old days, we used to say there's a sympathetic nervous system and there's a parasympathetic nervous system. And there are only two parts to that. And one is good and one is bad. And I remember the days of teaching kind of this idea. And there's only a dominance in sympathetics. And we only want to be parasympathetic. But as we started digging into this, we realized that's actually not necessarily true, not neurologically or biologically. And so that's really where it got interesting for us, is in this hierarchy and the two branches of the parasympathetic nervous system, which I'll let Don talk to.
Good. Please, Don.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, is that the vagus nerve actually has two branches. And actually, if you go back to where the nuclei is in the brain, they're actually in two separate spots. So they're almost like two separate cranial nerves in one. And so the ventral vagal, which is the ventral part of the vagus, that is what we normally think of parasympathetic. Like that's the good parasympathetic. We're connected. We're socially connected. That's the target. Then if we get into a situation where we detect danger around us, we go into a fight or flight. That's normal. That's what we always thought before. However, there's a third step that we didn't know about, which is basically the dorsal vagal kicks back in. And what it does is it shuts things down. So we think about in the wild, like, first of all, a prey will run. And then if it gets caught and it realizes that if I continue to fight, that's going to be dangerous for my life, it's actually going to play dead. Mm-hmm. The challenge with that part is it started in the reptilian times where the reptilians they didn't have to breathe, and they could not breathe for a couple hours. But we have such a big brain. Like we're very shallow breathers, and it shuts things down. And so that's what I was starting to see a lot with my practice members, is people were not in that fight or flight jacked up stage anymore. They were in that collapse. It was like they're turned off, like frozen.
Right. And so when you talk, and obviously that's why polyvagal, right?
Yep.
Many, different, so to access that or to look at that, is it something that you visibly see, or is it shown, through checks that you do on the, like you can look at leg checks or whatever, I'm not saying that for you, but, whatever it might be, or do heat scans, like the objectiveness of being able to look at, where someone's at on a polyvagal level.
Because I always like to think in cartoons. So when we're normally adjusting the spine, people are face down. So we're looking at the spinal nerves and the proprioception of the spine. We want to have good posture. We want to make sure everything's engaged, extensors are strong. Now, with this, what I've done is I flipped them over on their back, because there's 5 cranial nerves that makes up the social engagement system, and the vagus is kind of the driver of that. And I almost think of it like kind of in the movie Aliens, when the alien attacks the mouth and it comes right down and it goes down into the stomach, and then that's how it creates other aliens. In my brain, that is basically the social engagement system. So it's all the cranial nerves that create up all the facial expressions, your eyes, your voice, your hearing. And this goes back to the Harvey Lillard story in chiropractic. That's why this is so important. And what it is there's a face autonomic connection that is lifetime connected. And so you can see what shape someone's autonomics are by their face. And so one of the objective findings we've added, because I was telling you the other day how you were one of the first ones that I learned about objective testing, but now we're actually doing pictures of people's face, because you can tell when they're offline, they're either in fight or flight, or they're in the dorsal, but you can see it because they have that flatness, the lack of tone in their face, which means they have the lack of tone in their autonomics.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then Brandi, and I don't want to, I just want to go into like the office piece, right? When people walk in, like in your life, because you've been doing this for many years, obviously, right? Many, many years, Brandi, because, from the work that you learned in social work and all the other stuff, when you meet somebody, you can probably look at their facial expression and get something from that. Right? I just see it being so valuable to have, everyone in the office be able to see that and understand it on some level, not maybe diagnose it, but on some level to be able to know that when I'm dealing with this person who's coming into the office, they are shut down right now. So I'm not going to go there and be, how are you? Come here, give me a hug. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or if they're if they're very sympathetic, so we could actually kind of work with,
Yes.
before they even get back. How do you look at that?
Well, I think we get asked that a lot about how do you measure this? And so because this is a network system, there's going to be everything that most chiropractors do, they stay doing. When we created the Vitality Shift, the whole thing was about objective findings. That was the whole idea of the program. None of those changed. All of those objective findings stayed the same. It just told us some different stories that we maybe didn't recognize from before. So the objective findings didn't change as much as our understanding about the state that somebody is in would dictate actually our flexibility in our office as to how to handle them versus making everybody do the same thing. Because Don talked about the social engagement system. A massive part of the second premise of polyvagal is something called neuroception. And neuroception is below awareness and it's below consciousness, and it's a reflexive body sensory response to threat. It is what dictates the state of the nervous system. So now when you start to understand that it's reflexive, that it's somebody's not choosing that, then you, as a practitioner, number one, you really become quite objective in your observation. So I would say what became more objective for us is not all the lines and drawings and pictures and colors and all the stuff we loved before. What actually we became better at was our objectivity about observation, right, on a functional level versus a pathological level, because functionally this is all of those things married into one being that walked into your office. And sometimes we take that personally when they are in a nervous system state that their reflexes are telling them to stay in, even though the threat's no longer there. So objectively, we became really good at observing and then just managing our own selves for the third part of polyvagal, which is co-regulation, so that we don't continue to impact their nervous system at a threat level below their awareness. So I would say the objectivity thing and observation was our biggest factor change.
So go back to the neuroception because it's just fascinating, by the way. And with the neuroception, right? I mean, my first thought would be, and I'm kind of coming from this, I know a little bit about this, but believe me, I don't know even enough to make me dangerous. So that's how little I know. But my first thought around it is like people are going to walk in always on some kind of a level, right? Like I just left my job and I came to the office. I just left my work. I just had the biggest sale I ever had. I'm just on the top of the world, or I just left and I had a terrible review with my boss.
Yes.
So it's always going to be there.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's not about getting the person to one place and staying there. That's what I'm getting. It's about just having them live and express, right?
The hierarchy is a ladder, and it is a flexible ladder. It is not one or the other. The key is regulation, because we need to be in a rest slowed state. That's called intimacy. That's called cuddling. That is when our ventral vagal system is holding hands with that dorsal vagal. And it is not a dominant state to make a decision, which is collapse, shut down, or feign death. Yeah. Same as sympathetics. When you're doing something exciting, going on stage, you're performing with your kids, you're doing high level sports, you are regulated in a sympathetic state. So the flexibility of this ladder, which goes up and down, that's why it's a hierarchy, is really, really important. But the key is that it's not a dominant state without that friendship, or we always call it holding hands with ventral vagal, which is where regulation is. So the key is really regulation in the moment in time you have them in your office on the table. That's really our end outcome. It stopped being, did their legs balance? Because I'll tell you, one of the controversial things as we teach today, Don teaches protocols, is that a lot of the objective checks might actually be clear, but that person actually is not regulated. Now, how wild is that? Because it's more than the structure itself. And so once you see that, it's a whole mind bend, because you either go, whoa, I never saw that before, or many chiropractors have been practicing for some period of time go, I actually see that all the time, I just didn't know what it was.
Yeah, they do it.
But it's like the chicken or the egg, though, on some level, right? Like, do we clear their nervous systems out, right, and use whatever objective findings that technique uses, whatever it might be, clear their nervous systems, and therefore be able to access the vagal, have that communication functioning? Or is it the vagal, that with polyvagal that we want to kind of go with to clear to see that it's I get that it's one. I get that it's the hand clasping, right? But I can see the confusion that could happen in a practitioner saying, well, wait a minute. So even though they're coming in and their right leg is short, I'm just using it as an example for a technique, their right leg is short, it might be okay to be short because of, how they're co-regulating, or how they might not be we're always co-regulated, but whether they're co-regulating in balance or not, right? The word that's coming to me is coherence.
Yeah. I think for Don's protocol, the reason I really want him to start teaching technique is that when we started looking at the threat response, or neuroception, is 80% sensory, right? So what that means is the vagus nerve is 80% sensory, but from the body to the brain. Then when we talked to Stephen Porges, who is how this thing all started with us, as Don did a podcast, and Stephen said, I love that chiropractors are studying the prefrontal cortex, but if you don't get a handle on the brainstem, it doesn't matter. Right. It drives everything. It won't
give you access to the
You don't have as much access to it. So I think I'll let you speak to the body part, but I think getting that ventral part of the nervous system, which is mostly body up, and especially the autonomics below diaphragm, that's something we didn't really consider as being A, chiropractic in the past, and B, something that we would even consider until we started really digging into the neurology of polyvagal. Right. Then it just made a lot of sense to us.
Yeah, and in my mind, Neuroception, I remember way back when I listened to Bruce Lipton one of the first times, when one of his big paradigm shift was the nucleus didn't drive the cell. Right. It was the cell membrane. And what the cell membrane what had neuroception. So what there was, the cell membrane is just consciously, is just monitoring the environment all the time, scanning. And the thing that really changed my mind, because in chiropractic, like the old method used to be pressure on the nerve, right? And then the nerve didn't work properly. And then now we knew it was more like proprioception. Like as we get more activity, it lights up the brain and it lets our brain and body communicate. But the vagus nerve is more of a surveillance system. So this is very interesting, because I think of it like a camera system on this big apartment building, and your brain is basically in the control room looking at all the screens. And what it's doing is it's detecting cues of threat from the cells in our body throughout our thoracic autonomic areas. And so we are actually not, when we're doing the adjustment, we're not so much necessarily taking pressure. Well, you can, it's a cranial nerve. We're not taking pressure off the cranial nerve. It's not subluxated. However, we are trying to add cues of safety into our physiology so that it can detect safety. And then all of a sudden it goes, we're clear, turn the prefrontal cortex back on. So that's in my brain, that's how I've kind of reframed it.
Right. So looking at that model that you just described, on, that therefore, once the body says it's clear, right? Mm-hmm. The prefrontal cortex, on which we know is all, is how the prefrontal cortex works. We don't need to go into that, but once we do that, once the body does that, it goes into a state of, we'll just say, for lack of a better word, coherence, right? And then is that when, and I'm just curious, when someone would adjust, because I'd much rather adjust a body that's more in a state of ease than somebody who comes in is all jacked up because of their sympathetics are going crazy, right? Happening like that. Is that kind of like the protocol of how it would work? And I don't want you to give away your $1 million,
Oh, that's
I know. But we can't get into the whole technique, obviously. But is that kind of like the premise, to be able to see that? Or maybe they don't get clear, you adjust them, and then you do some work. I don't know exactly how it works, but in a nutshell, kind of what is it?
Yeah, I find it depends on when they're coming in. So, for example, if it's a new practice member and they're in a state that's not accepting very much input, so our force application has to be really low, or else they're super sensitive. Often, I'll flip them over on their back, and I call it the MacDonald safety corridor, because basically it's the whole area where the vagus nerve controls, and there's certain areas that it goes through, which is the occiput, the first rib, the clavicles, the whole rib cage. Because again, if our rib cage is not moving correctly, that is automatically going to send cues of danger throughout the whole thoracic cage, because breathing is vital. And then it's the diaphragm, the stomach, a lot of viscera stuff, and then the hip flexors, all the way down to the pubic bones and the femur head. So I always said, before I started doing this innately anyway, because we're always trying to open up posture, because we always knew as you had better posture, that was always better for the prefrontal cortex. But also, you can't have good posture unless you're detecting cues of safety. So like this all intertwines together. And so I started opening up people. Like I started trying to open up the ribs, the sternum, making sure the pecs are open, lower ribs are all moving, the viscera is moving, like the femur heads are opening. I was trying to do that innately anyway, but now it just made more sense. And I talked to Brandi about this the other day, and it's the difference between constructive and destructive learning. All the old things we heard is like, the power that made the body heals the body. Like loving service is my number one technique. Present time consciousness. Like that's a constructive, where you're getting all these concepts and you're building something. The thing I like about polyvagal, as we tie it into chiropractic, is it's destructive. So it's like the umbrella on top. But what it does is it makes sense of a lot of stuff that we're already doing, but now we can actually do it more consciously rather than just subconsciously. So it just gives us we just become far more powerful chiropractors when we have that conscious, we know exactly why we're doing it. We're not just we always do it just because we do it. A funny thing is co-regulation, we all talk about, is the way we just help someone else's nervous system calm down by being in their presence. I was adjusting at this one seminar, and I talk about breathing with the practice member, and I hadn't even said it yet. And I told them, breathe in and breathe out. And I just said, stop. And like, there's 4 chiropractors around the table and everybody's breathing. So we innately already know, like everybody in the whole room was breathing at the same speed. And I'm like, see, we already know how to do it, but it tells you why we're doing it and why it's so powerful.
Yeah. And I love what you just said about like the constructive or destructive, because really, chiropractic is built on deductive logic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's just who we are, right? So, and that's what you're starting to break it down, because you're going to get to that point, of where it is, instead of trying to build up and have all these things up here, and you don't know what it is. I think
doing it, but you don't know.
I think it's aspirin. I think it's acetaminophen. It's this, and then you're just lost in this big quagmire. It's so cool. And obviously, from what I'm getting right now, is this is not technique specific. It's not, nothing like that. Anywhere from a tonal technique to a osseous,
Blair,
and everything in between can, this is really just about, assessing the nervous system. And is it a process? Is it a long time? Is it simple? I'm not simple when I say that, but is it, for a practitioner, is it something that they can just incorporate right into their practice?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that most people can just start doing stuff and it's just adding a few things. I just call it amplifiers. So it's basically amplifiers onto the existing technique you're already doing, right, just to double check to make sure that safety corridor is in a state of ease. And it's funny, in polyvagal, they call it safety. In chiropractic, we call it ease, but it's the same thing. But we're trying to create ease through the autonomics so that it just bounces off with the musculoskeletal part. Right. Which is kind of the ventral and the dorsal. I never flip people onto their back and then see what's going on the inside. And then once I start working on the ribs and the stomach and stuff, like they just change, and you can just see it in their face. Like we do before and after pictures just of adjustments, and it just gives them an extra sparkle, even on top of what your regular adjustments already do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Woo. I just feel like I was just sitting back in school. And I know you guys are coming. I want to thank you, because I know I think it's in January, you said?
Yeah, January.
Yeah.
January that you'll be here, and you'll be teaching to our students and doing seminar, and then holding a seminar afterwards, an 8-hour program for them afterwards. And, it's just so interesting, because I think whether you touch somebody or not, just knowing this information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, just knowing it. So Brandi, we kind of touched on it earlier, just having that, this awareness that when you meet somebody and the banter or whatever it is going back and forth, the relationship going back and forth, just what you think it was supposed to be, that there's usually a reason, right? And it could be me, it could be you, it doesn't matter, but to be able to be aware of that, because it just creates more connection,
yes,
right, with people, right?
The ultimate end goal of a regulated nervous system is social engagement. That is ventral vagal. That is, we are designed to be connected to one another at a neurological and biological level. What we didn't recognize before in chiropractic is how much that is tied into the autonomics determining the face. And everything we do with people is about their face. Yeah. It's actually not about anything else. We interpret things through people's faces. That's why everybody that has babies, I always joke around, our chiropractors love to breed. So everybody has multiple babies. And so everybody recognizes when a baby's face is off, when they can't head turn, when they can't suck, when they can't swallow, when they can't vocalize. That is an impaired social engagement system, because the ventral vagal system gets developed through other nervous systems. That's what co-regulation means. That's how we develop as mammals. And so that part of it, when we recognize that we are interruptive or engaging every single time we're with somebody as a practitioner, that actually creates a whole lot of responsibility for us that we may not have had before. Or maybe we didn't want it. But once you know it, you can't really unknow it. Yeah. It's a really tough, I always say, this is not an easy way to practice, because it was a lot easier when somebody could lay down, you never have to talk to them.
Take the pressure off the bone and your body heals itself, and you're like, that was easier.
But as we know, awareness is always there. We're evolving as a profession. We're evolving as practitioners, and and the three of us know that there's no one right way, but there certainly is, things that we can incorporate that can make our way work better, right? And that's really what we're about, just bringing who we are, what we are, and what we do to the people that we see in the best possible manner, so that we can get the results that we're looking for. And that's to create a healthier person, which will ultimately create a healthier family, healthier city, healthier country, healthier world kind of deal. And I'm inspired by you guys. So you're amazing. You're amazing.
You stand on the shoulders of giants like you.
Well, listen, I can't wait for you to be here. And I'm thrilled. So, but we've kind of hit that time in our show, and we could go on. I mean, we could keep talking about this forever. Thank you. Thanks for what you're bringing to the profession. More than that, thanks for what you're bringing to humanity, because this is gonna help people evolve and help. As practitioners, whether they're chiropractors or anybody, it's going to help them be able to understand who they're dealing with and what they're working with, on a physical level, on a social level, right? On a mental level, because that all affects everything. And if you can start reading that and seeing that, it's just amazing. So I'm really thrilled for you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our viewers, thank you. Thank you for tuning in week after week. As you know, this is a Life West Leadership Line. We drop these every other week. The opposite weeks are the Life by Life West that me and my wife, Dr. Mary, hold. And I'm just thrilled. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to this about 3 or 4 times just to kind of get it, and then probably 6 or 7 times to kind of start to own some of this, and then start doing my research. It might be easier just to go to one of your programs and I don't have to, and get it like that. But it just, there's just a lot of bombs that were dropped today, or pearls of wisdom. So keep, listen to this. There's people that we know that need to hear this. And as I say all the time, I want to thank you for spreading this, the webcast and sharing it. We're now on podcasts, as you know, that I've been hearing all over. People listen to it when they're driving to work or when they're going wherever. But please, I just got to thank you for sharing everything that you've done, because we're just together is how we're going to make a change in this world. And, we can't do it individually. So I appreciate you so much. until the next time, well, from Dr. Don and Brandi and myself, we just want to let you know that you are more powerful than you were ever led to believe, and that keep spreading your love and spreading your magic and creating a brighter future for humanity, because this world certainly deserves to be functioning at its optimal level, and you're a big part of that. So until I see you at our next Life West Leadership Line, we'll bid you adieu, and thanks so much for being with us.